Hello, everybody. Religious fanboy here again, and today we are getting back into talking about Erased. This week we are discussing the Christian lessons themes in episode 3 of Erased, titled "The Bruise," and we are talking about motives and what it means to not only say and do what is right, but to actually do it regardless of consequences. I should give a disclaimer right now because one of the characters that we will be talking about today in his actions in this episode might lead to me accidentally spoiling part of the plot. So if you've not watched this episode and have not watched the show before, I would recommend doing that before watching this video, just in case. Try my best not to spoil things, but I feel given the subject matter, there is good possibility of me spoiling things. Um, our the main characters we'll be talking about is Satoru, our main protagonist, Yuki, and Yashiro primarily. Um, but before I dive into that, I want to open up with three our first passage of scripture that we will dive into more deeply, kind of narrow in on, which is Corinthians, which is Second Corinthians, chapter 8, verse 21. Book of Corinthians is made up of letters. First and Second Corinthians are letters that are thought to be originally written by the Apostle Paul. Uh, Written to and originally given to a church in Corinth. Um, that verse says, "For what we aim, for we aim at what is honorable, not only in the Lord's sight, but also in the sight of man." The way this episode portrays how difficult this could be for people is with the character Yuki. Um, because he is someone that comes across, he cares a lot about the kids in the town and is friendly to them. He is someone that is perceived to have pedophilic tendencies just because of how often he's seen around kids. We we realize that in in the future, the person that was um, falsely accused for the murders of Kaio, Hiromi, and I don't remember the other girl's name right now, but it's because a lot of the kids in the town and around where the show takes place that are lonely a lot of time are not like to hang out at the park are often hanging out with Yuki. This is why when they start disappearing due to that knowledge and the perception of Yuki as well as the evidence in his room, which it is later revealed to us that this was planted on him in order to frame him for the murders. Um, we see part of this touched upon when, in a short little instance where it is revealed that whoever the killer ends up being, that Yuki had viewed as a friend. We assume that he didn't know about the murders. Um, hides his the killer hides his porn there, one which is a brief scene here, but is referenced later as one of the bits of evidence that people would falsely attribute to Yuki being the killer, and him justifying like the reason he gives for not throwing them out is because he said that a friend was keeping that was there for a friend. And with his response and body language, we can tell how conflicted he is about that, how he is ashamed and would rather not be in there in his room, in his possession and that he would rather throw it out. Um, which makes it really sad later on to hear how he was framed, and we learn about why he always seemed anxious and nervous and had like nervous stutter was because he struggled with like anxiety and wasn't very confident when having conversations with people. Um, and the other moment that I will talk about primarily is in the ways this theme is paralleled in the episode is with a conversation between Yashiro and Toru where this takes place in the episode after Toru finds out that Kaio's mom beats her, and like realizing why that's why Kaio doesn't go to never goes to school on Monday is because the swell like her swelling is still going down, and we see her mom submerging her head in ice water to get the swelling down, and in that we see her motives for why she worked so hard to keep things hidden. She does not We get the idea that she does not care about Kaio's safety, or at least has very little regard for it, because the reason that she this is implied in knowing that the reason she gives for worrying about so much about getting the swelling down as quickly as possible was so that people didn't see signs of the abuse and start investigating and asking her questions. And Satoru and Yashiro, when Satoru is trying to figure out when Kaio's birthday is, both because they are friends and also um and he also believes based on the ages given for the kids when they died that it was the night before Kaio's birthday that she was murdered in the original timeline. And Toru talks about how important it is to get Kaio away from her abuser, away from her mom. And that even though he cares about her a lot and considers her to be a good friend and wants to be her friend, he is still approaches the situation with a position of selflessness, with the mindset and motive of just wanting Tayo to be safe. Where, in contrast, we hear Yashiro talk about his suspicions that he's had for a while, and Toru actually gets mad at Yashiro for not speaking up and doing something sooner and reporting it. And but Yashiro replies with excuses about not wanting people to pick on her more and make her more miserable by finding out this of situation. Kyle and talking about how she would leave forever, and it is heavily implied that I get comes across as him trying to hide things. Like, he is definitely more selfish and trying to justify his actions by trying to allude to um, Toro's human selfishness of, and like his desire to have Kyle in his life. We also see the theme with Toru through his interactions with the other kid that he has an ice skating race against, where Satoru ended up throwing the race, even after telling Tayo that he would try his best to win. Um, but he threw the match because he knew how much the other kid had been training and with the hockey team. So he felt like he deserved to win. And in direct response to this, Kai, the kid um, beats up Satoru and says that he hates him for letting him win, basically. And Kyle gets frustrated for a bit until Satoru has an honest conversation about what he what he did in throwing the race. And despite how many times they've been angry with each other, Satoru still in this episode wants to go, still stands up for her. When the class thinks that she had stolen the lunch money, and also tries to cheer her up by taking her up on the mountain. And that's where this episode ends, with a cliffhanger of um don't quite remember his name right now, but Kenya. With Kenya and Yashiro meeting in Yashiro's office. Um, this episode does a great job of showing and paralleling the differences and conflicts that come from trying to do what's honorable to the Lord. And we see in ways how the idea given in the scripture calls us to a more selfless thought process in our decision making. But we also see how trying to balance the pleasing of man and pleasing of God to create conflict, and how our worries about one over the other can create conflicts that we need to have the courage to address in civilized and thoughtful ways. Like how Yuki should have told the friend off, saying that he was not gonna store the guy's porn stash for him, and that should not be something a friend asks a friend to do. Um, Especially pornography in the nature that it was. Um, and how Satoru, when he threw the race, is what he thought was right in the moment, but he also realized that he needed to communicate his reasons and justification for doing so, because in throwing the race, he did break the promise he had made to Kaio to do his best. And this is visible within how Satoru has a strong desire and priority of getting Kaio out of the abusive relationship with her mom, and out of and away from the killer, and keep her safe no matter what it takes. Where in contrast, Yashiro does seem to be saying similar things about wanting Kaio to be safe, but also he makes excuses as a way of preventing himself and as a way to try to convince others to not act in order to in ways that would make Kyo's situation better. Um, some of the terms used in dictionaries to refer to honoring to God and to aim for what is honoring to God. Some synonyms that are used are terms like exceedingly fair, acceptable unto God. So this verse seems. I'm actually gonna pull up. I'm actually just gonna pull up this passage, read the rest of the section that it's in, and then I think call it good for today. Call it good for this video. Excuse me. Gonna read verses 16 through 24, the end of the chapter. But thanks be to God who put into the heart of Titus the same earnest care I have for you. For he not only accepted our appeal, but being himself very earnest, he is going to you of his own accord. With him we are sending the brother who is famous among all the churches for his preaching the gospel. And not only that, but he has been appointed by the church to travel with us as we carry out this act of the glory of the Lord Himself and to show our goodwill. We take this course so that no one could blame us about the generous gift that is being administered what is honorable, not only to the Lord's sight, but also in the sight of man. And with that, we are sending our brothers, whom we have often tested and found are earnest in many matters, but who is now more earnest than ever because of his great confidence in you. As for Titus, he is my partner and fellow worker for your benefit. And as for our brothers, they are messengers of the churches, the glory of Christ. So give proof before the churches of your love and of your boasting about you to these men. This passage is talking primarily about the sending of Titus. Titus was another Gentile Christian that I think was from Greece that during Paul's travels would become good friends and was one of his many partners in ministry whenever Paul couldn't go somewhere in person to help and teach people. He would send a letter along with the one of his partners, and in his letters it wouldn't be uncommon for there to be a list of recommendations and credentials for the person he was sending, especially they if the church had been familiar with Paul but wasn't familiar or wasn't as familiar with the partner that he was sending to work with them. And yeah, um, I with that being said, this is a theme that we will be talking about later on in as we go through the series, and we will unpack some other passages of scripture. And with that being said, I hope and pray that you take away from this video and the episode in the scripture whatever God intends for you to take away from them. And with that being said, may God be with you, and I will see you next time. Bye.